Greetings, all. We are joined today by Nate with the DeEEP Network. Super excited to have a discussion about this project. It's been something I've been looking at for some time. Nate, thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, man. Glad to be here. It's going to be a good one.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to dig into all the nitty gritty details. Also want to give a shout out to my boy, Daniel Young, who introduced us. He's been talking about this project for a few months now. He's like, man, you got to take a look at it. And I haven't had any decentralized node networks on my channel to this point, but I have to say, after digging into this project, and we'll talk about all this in this interview, there's a lot of reasons why I think this project is set apart from the rest. But before we get into the nitty gritty details, Nate, would love for you to give us a little bit about your background and the things you're doing leading up to the DeEEP Network.
Yeah. My name's Nate Harper. I'm fully doxxed. I used to be Forged in crypto, which it still is on a lot of things. But as we started to push our projects out, it was, just put my name on there. Just put Nate on there. So because everybody's like, who's what? All the Discords and Telegrams, nobody knows who's what. So anyways, yeah, Nate, I've been around the crypto ecosystem for a long time. And really, so we're going to talk about DeEEP. So I'm just going to kind of, get into just a beginning of what that was. I got into the Web3 gaming ecosystem 2019 and into 20. And realistically, it was Gala Games kind of got me into that. I knew one of the main developers for their games that were in there. And so I dove in deep from the get-go. They had nodes as an ecosystem. I bought some of their nodes. They were very hard to run. It took a lot of time to make sure that they're up and running and different things that were going on. It was just, I didn't have time. And so a friend of mine reached out to me, he wasn't a friend at the time, but he reached out to me and said, hey, I'll run them for you. He did that. It was great. He ended up getting hired by Gala. I was like, what are you going to do with that? It's a great business model. Let me buy it from you. He's like, don't buy it from me. He's like, I'll just, send you some of the contacts that I have that I'm running. So for people, that turned into Nerd Node, essentially, of running nodes as a service, node as a service provider. And that was in 2021, essentially, when that really 2020, but to 2021 is when it really started. Okay. And, with that, it just developed into the idea of where we were hosting in the beginning. We had our own hardware internally, and then we kind of used AWS and some other virtual servers around, but we really wanted to be able to decentralize the network hardware-wise. And we went down a ton of different avenues with it, but ultimately led up to the DeEEP Network with what we have now that we're pushing out. So that was the kind of the start, node as a service provider, bringing in people that need help with their nodes. Like, we're a one-click deployment. We try to make it as easy as possible, full suite, super simple. And then now we have DeEEP.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering because I looked into the history a bit and I was thinking, was this the plan all along? Was it a natural progression the way things went? Sounds like it was more a natural progression that just kind of, built and got to where you are today with it becoming fully decentralized now with the DeEEP Network.
Yeah, 100%. Yep. And it was never DePIN. Actually, when we started the idea of what we wanted to do, DePIN wasn't this hashtag and decentralized physical infrastructure going around everywhere. It wasn't even there. It was what we wanted to do to push out the actual hardware to people. And then, lo and behold, DePIN comes around and starts to kind of gain traction. And then we just kind of fell in line with that. So.
Okay. It's a super cool story. And you mentioned your docs. The whole team is doxed, by the way. Highly recommend going and looking. Like, their team is phenomenal. That was the first thing that stood out to me when I started looking at your project was, and talking to people that are huge fans of, DeEEP Network. You guys, in my live streams, people kept bringing up your project, but the team was like the first thing, which I think is super important. I mean, it's one of the things I look at with every project because it's really important to be able to execute on all ends, right? And part of that is the supply side. I know people love talking about the supply side, building out the networks and the infrastructure side. Part of it is the demand side, right? Which I think is just 100%. As important. I know you guys agree with that too. For people that have watched my channel before, they know that I put a lot of emphasis on the demand side. And I want to dig in more on that because, you talked about Nerd Node and how you guys had already been bringing on demand in that realm. It was more centralized, I guess, for a while, right? And over time, then you started thinking, okay, well, let's make this more decentralized. And here we are with DeEEP Network, this decentralized node network. So, different than other node networks that just build out the network and then try to get the demand. You guys have a fair amount of demand today, correct?
Yeah, and in all honesty, we'd be much larger had we focused on that demand side even more and not on the deep side as we started to transition. A lot of people start to see that, and they have. If you're in the Discord, we've got a lot of partnerships we've been announcing, like Grid most recently. We have a few more that are lined up, playable games they just launched, a bunch of stuff like that. But yeah, we wanted to have this demand side. Like and I agree with you 100%. When we talked about this from the get-go, we kind of happened into it. But as you push it out there, there's, it's which one egg is it, the chicken or the egg, right? And with the demand side, by us bringing this demand side in full transparency, obviously with Nerd Node, we take a hit. Like we could continue doing what we're doing at Nerd Node, just grow Nerd Node and create a viable business that somebody would probably come along and purchase and do the whole thing.
Yeah.
But we're sharing in that revenue, right? With 50% of that revenue going to those device owners that put in that work to be able to run that workload. It does help us, right? Like having the now pushing into the hardware side and allowing us to be able to offload that hardware expense, the power expense and everything that goes along there onto the network itself. Well, you should have something to share with that person that's giving you that, and not just a token that's a magical token that does nothing, right? What does it do? You can run this device and it gives you a token. Well, what is that token used for? Well, we have, again, this is why we created the flywheel of our tokenomics, of having that ability to use DeEEP internally, and that's the main core of it, is using it for purchasing workloads throughout. We have other things that we'll use it for throughout, but that's the main one, like actually running a workload. So there's a use case there. You can use it for that. And, we all share in what the growth can be.
No, that makes sense. I definitely do want to dig in more in a minute on that, because the minting rewards versus the hosting rewards and the actual workloads and how that revenue flows to contributors. But moving to a decentralized concept, I want to understand more, like how are those conversations building out Nerd Node? I imagine those conversations with potential customers and users of the network became easier over time as you had a track record. But what has motivated you all to go decentralized, and get fully decentralized? And how does that move the needle for you guys with potential customers?
Well, I'll kind of go back to our team, right? You talked about our team, and funny story. As we started, I had other businesses. I came from the Web 2 side. I had other businesses, and one of my businesses was in a building here in town, and I was on the second floor, and below me was this other company, and I knew of the company, but I didn't know of the people. Fast forward 7 years later, well, I got introduced to those people. It was Ben and Chris Corrado. And their background was essentially the Web 2 version of what DePIN is, right? They were deploying IoT devices across the world, thousands of these into different businesses, and their claim to fame is, one of their big, I shouldn't say claim to fame, but one of their big customers was McDonald's. They have 5 of their devices in every McDonald's across the world, right? So the idea of DePIN and, decentralizing the hardware across the world is not new, right? And they came from that world of, this is what we do. Like they've done it and they had the idea of it. And so it really was just kind of a perfect match. So once we got together and we started talking about this, we brought them into Nerd Node, and then we founded DeEEP, and it those two ideas, bringing the IoT side to the Web3 side, it's a perfect match, and then we just kind of moved on from there.
No, that makes
sense. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. I mean, that's, I guess, the fact that they were able to get IoT devices in McDonald's, they understand the how to generate the demand side, I guess. For people watching that are unfamiliar, I mean, you're creating this decentralized cloud basically. So you're going head to head with, like AWS, and you're trying to pull business away from some of these larger providers. So what is your customer side look like today? Like the makeup of the workloads on Nerd Node that you're moving over to the DeEEP network on the infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And then when you're having those discussions, what are the benefits to going with you guys over like a larger centralized player?
Yeah, it's funny. I was on a Spaces this morning, and we were talking about this exact thing. And the big thing that comes into play is it's a trust factor that we have to move past. The centralized company, they do good things, right? They have a company that's doing great things for people. That's obviously why they're around, and they make billions of dollars doing what they do. And we're not competing with AWS or Azure or anything along those lines, and we're never going to push that out as in what we're trying to do. We're not the next AWS.
Yeah.
We saw a problem in the Web3 industry of nodes and validators being ran on centralized companies, yet these companies were saying we're decentralized, but your entire infrastructure, 70, in some cases 75 to 80% is ran on a centralized company, which brings you to that's a single point of failure, right? That centralized company is a single point of failure. We just saw this yesterday with Binance and KuCoin going down because a lot of their services were ran on AWS. And that's a key problem that we can solve, as we move down the road here. And so, and the other factor that we like to look at is really kind of transparency. In the centralized side there's nothing transparent there other than here's what you're paying for, here's what you get. Well, what's happening all on the back end? And our goal is to be as transparent as we possibly can with everything that we do. With the development of DeEEP, we want to turn DeEEP into a decentralized autonomous corporation, so people can participate within the advancement of DeEEP and see everything that we're trying to do to make it a great product. So that's really kind of the centralized versus decentralized aspect there. So
gotcha. Yeah, the uptime makes sense. I'm sure, censorship resistance to an extent also
Sure.
is a factor. What about cost? I mean, how do you guys compare to some of the other larger players like the AWS, for example, on cost?
Yeah, I mean, we're with what we offer, we're right in line with cost, if not way better of an option. Sometimes we're cheaper than a centralized company or like an AWS or an Azure, where you're going to pay for a virtual server. Right now, a lot of our services, we're charging that same price, but we're doing all the work for these customers as a node, as a service provider. And that's our goal, is to make things as easy as possible for people to deploy what they need to, whether it's us doing the work for you or allowing you to do work that goes into it. Cost effective, right? And by distributing our network into homes and businesses with the DeEEP devices, it really helps us lower those costs of barriers to entry for cost of that hardware. So we can be competitive in price. We can be competitive in the actual security and hardware, and makes us a viable option for a lot of different things, not just Web3. So,
yeah, that's the next thing I want to talk about. So it's a good transition. Because for people watching, I always like to give examples. So some of the services, nodes, validators, computational work. So, cloud compute, gaming. So I want to touch more on that too. I know that's been a big topic recently, website storage. So a lot of different avenues you can go into offer services. So where do you see the biggest or the most low hanging fruit, I guess, right now, and what you're actually addressing today, and what does that look like moving forward?
Yeah, we chose to stick with the Web3 aspect of it and DePIN and run with the idea of DePIN because it's easy for these crypto native or DePIN native people to understand what we are trying to do. When you throw around terms like decentralized, distributed, immutable, you go to the normal customer, they have no clue what you're talking about, right?
Right.
So the Web3 side is really where we want to push, and that's why we've really gone the route of marketing ourselves as a DePIN project in that sense. So, and we're ripe for taking a lion's share of the services that are going to centralized services in the validator arena, the node arena, and even in the gaming side. We're working with some game developers personally on their specific games. We're working with other actual game companies, game developing companies that are out there to either push their games to the actual network itself, portions of it that they're using centralized services for. Yeah, man, I came from the game side, like the gaming side. So a lot of my contacts, a lot of my dealings, and a lot of my assets actually are, in the Web3 side are on the gaming side. So it's
Okay.
definitely one of the key factors. The thing that really aligns with both of them that I think is really cool is the understanding of bringing on that Web 2 customer to Web 3 in gaming. If it's done right, and we're seeing Gun, that ecosystem, the way they push theirs out, it was people playing a game and they had no clue it was blockchain, right? That's what blockchain can do for that side of it. And we've always had that idea there. They did a great job of bringing those players in without knowing that it's a crypto native game, right? It's running on an Avalanche L1. DePIN's the same way, right? You have these DePIN deployers that go out and they take these devices and they talk to businesses and say, hey, I'm going to put this in your business, or I'm going to put this in your home, and I'm going to share in this revenue. Everybody understands passive income. What does that mean? If I could push this in here, I'm going to pay you a little bit of money.
Yeah.
All you're doing is letting me share in your bandwidth or your power, that kind of situation. So that's those two together, I think, have a really good idea or really good opportunity to bring the Web 2 side to Web 3.
I agree. And this is a topic, I have an X Space that I host weekly, and we do talk about this a lot, about being able to bridge Web 2 into Web 3. And it has to be a seamless process, right? And I think the security aspect is a big hurdle as well for a lot of these projects. But the other thing we talk about is, and you mentioned this, especially in DePIN, the dirty little secret about DePIN is that most of the projects aren't fully decentralized, right? A lot of them are still using AWS or, Azure. And, so I guess the question I have for you around that is, what do you think needs to happen to get these DePIN projects and Web3? Because you can think about getting Web 2 in a meaningful way. I mean, we should have our own people using decentralized solutions first. So, for like DePIN projects that have been hesitant to move over, how do we get them to make that transition? And then how do we get to a point eventually? And I think we'll get there where a fully decentralized stack is the norm.
Yeah, 100%. And it goes back to what I was saying before. That's why we chose the Web3 side, because it is ripe for these people that say, and decentralized is such a weird word, right? Because it's a spectrum, or at least I feel it's a spectrum. And in full transparency, we aren't decentralized right now. Like NerdNode right now is making the decisions that are going into DeEEP, right? We're deciding what's being developed. We're deciding what workloads are going to put on there. So we are, in that sense, we are centralized. Our goal as we push forward is to decentralize us, not just the network. Apparently my camera went out, but not just the network. I'll fix it here in a second.
Okay.
Not just the network, but the way that the network is operated. And that's where the DAO comes into play too. So, showing that our network, if anybody's using AWS, right, in the Web3 ecosystem, we have the ability to do exactly what AWS is doing, exactly what Azure is doing, but actually decentralize your company and where it's being hosted on the DeEEP network. We have that ability to do that. That is where we're going to start and where we're going to push, and then move into other things. So
that makes sense. This is a topic we've talked about as well. Is the decentralized as far as the hardware goes and the infrastructure, decentralized as far as governance goes. I mean, two different topics, right? And one of the things we've landed on as far as governance goes, especially in the early stages, it's hard to be fully decentralized and be successful because, most people are going to vote with their best interest, their own personal interest in mind, right? And that's not always what's best for the network. So I think in the early stages, especially, it's important to have a balance and then transition to more of a decentralized governance over time. But
everything's kind of starts centralized, right? You don't have a perfectly, even Bitcoin itself, like who developed it, right? Satoshi, right? Or whatever Satoshi is.
Yeah.
It starts somewhere. It's the idea of people using that term decentralized and just throwing it about without really showing how they are decentralized or how they're going to get there. And that comes with the other, idea of what we really like to try to do is be transparent. Like how are we trying to approach this? And here in the coming weeks, you'll start to see we're going to post a lot of our docs for the DAC and how we want the community to be involved and the device owners and how we feel that can really, position Deep Network and us to, really take a hold of the Web3 industry and kind of give you a little idea of what that looks like. Is the reason we're choosing a DAC is we are a corporation, right? We are running with revenue that comes in from one point and goes to another. It's not completely just an organization like a gaming DAO or something like that that's going to choose what new game are we going to go into. We have to operate in terms of customers that we need to benefit, and so we really operate as a corporation. But we can decentralize a lot of the aspects that go into that in terms of decision making or direction that we want to choose. The easy one is workloads, right? As we transition to that, what type of workloads? Well, we want the community to be able to say, we want this workload. Mm-hmm. Bring that to the table. Let's have the DAC look at it and actually analyze, is this something we want to put on this network? Does this fit into what we want to do?
All right. And Nate's back on camera. But yeah, to continue that, I've had different founders of different DePIN projects on, and I've interviewed them. I've asked them about this. I've asked them about why they're still using AWS. And I think for a lot of people, it's like they don't want to rock the boat. If it ain't broke, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. And I'm putting my sales hat on, I'm thinking, okay, where are the opportunities to really push these people over? I think eventually there'll just be decentralized stacks, and it might be a collaboration of projects that come together to create this, to where new DePIN projects coming in just automatically start out decentralized, right? But for the projects that already exist, it might be, a bear market or an extended downturn in the markets where, they can shift their focus again to maybe rocking the boat to an extent, to change their infrastructure, where all of a sudden that AWS bill looks a little different when the market's, down, to be able to get them to make that switch. I don't know. I was just kind of thinking through the opportunities. I spent a lot of my career in the sales side of things. So I tried to think about what those conversations look like.
Well, it's a trust factor, and you're exactly right. Like, they trust AWS, they trust Azure to do what they need to do. And even that blip yesterday that happened with Binance and KuCoin, they're down for a little bit. People forget about it. They move on. It is what it is. Money lost. Obviously, they have to take that into consideration.
Sure.
I think there's another aspect to it. It's not just the money side, not just the downside and the money side, but if people really want this in the projects that they're investing in, people are going out and saying, hey, we're a decentralized project. We are decentralized. We're Ethereum. And yet 80% of our validators are ran in AWS. Like, at a point in time, the demand from the customer side will push that too. Like, well, you're not really decentralized. And that's, one of the things that we really want to do is grow with partnerships. Like we saw with Grid. I recently, I'm a big Star Atlas fan in the Solana ecosystem, and they recently partnered with Shaga to run some of their games on people's, basically Shaga. What they do is they have people that download their software onto their gaming device, and then they can now play Star Atlas in some of the more higher end, gaming side that they need with the GPUs that are there. Huh. Well, I talked with the Shy guys, like, this is something that is a perfect marriage. Like, we could work with you to create a partnership where we, deploy out a hardware device that runs the Deep Network and also runs your software, and people can then now play, on a dedicated device, and you're truly decentralizing what's going on there. So they've got a cool program that's going on. So things like that is really how we want to grow and push that stuff out. So
sure. That actually, thinking about that. So that's one example, but in your current pipeline, and looking at Node Nerd, how many, have you heard this from people that, they're holding out, like, once you guys are fully decentralized, we'll move over to you guys? Is that something you're hearing already today, or is that something you'll hear more of moving forward?
Your crypto native, like the hardcore, like, again, decentralized is a fun term that people like to throw around, right? Sure. And those hardcore guys that are like, well, you're not truly decentralized. And I can argue that, realistically, nobody really is going to be truly decentralized. What does that look like? If you have 1 million devices, it's 1 million people that are hosting that device, equally across the world, and they all have the equal uptime. And, it's a theory that really can't get there, but there's an idea of how far can you go that makes it, operationally beneficial for the network and for the companies that are using it, and then beneficial in terms of monetary wise for
Sure.
the network and the people that are using it. So yes, to answer your question, there's not a lot that say no. I think we're using it in terms of really kind of creating a place for the community, right? That decentralized factor of it and how we're moving about it is really what we want it to be. So,
Okay, that makes sense. Getting back to the Web 2 side, and then I do want to talk about the supply side and what you
yeah,
guys are doing on that end. One of the big things that always comes up when talking about bringing Web 2 into Web 3, I think one of the big hurdles is the security factor, right? Because you can always be better on cost. You can always talk about the benefit of uptime with decentralization, but if the security aspect isn't there, well, those cost savings can disappear very quickly, right? So I've reading through your documentation. It sounds like this is something you guys have been really, really serious about. So I wanted you to speak to the security aspect of the network.
yeah, and I'm gonna do it into zero justice because that's Ben, our CEO. Like, is he? I mean, that's where he started. Like, we have to have security. We went through, you know, dozens and dozens of different devices to start with. Is in ultimately why we landed on the minis forum little mini server. Essentially, is what it is because it allowed us the ability to implement certain security measures that we needed and we wanted, because we always are looking at in the Web3 side, not people are like, yeah, maybe security, they might not care. But once we start to go to the actual companies that are using it, that want that security, we wanted to have that there. We needed it there. So on the technical side, I can't get into that, but I will tell you, one of these days you should maybe have Ben, if you want to go on the technical side. He'll talk for days, but that was why we went through so many iterations of different hardware and what we needed to implement it and how we were developing it from the ground up. And the operating system that he used security was like a huge factor for us.
Okay. Yeah. And obviously that's going to be really, really important. If right now your focus is Web3, obviously. And I just say, looking at the addressable market, you can have an incredibly successful project just focusing on Web3. And Web3 is only going to continue to grow. Obviously, there's a massive market on the Web2 side as well. But even if you grabbed a small fraction of that market, you guys could be absolutely massive. Talking about the supply side, and again, this is, I think, one of your biggest differentiators, is that as opposed to most node networks, they build out the supply first, and they essentially give out token rewards, their native token, and then there's this promise of demand coming, at some point. Whereas you guys have really cut that part out of the process because you've already put in the work with NerdNode to build up demand that you can push over. So you're able to turn on that demand immediately for the DeEEP network, which I think is massive on many different fronts. But it's also a big reason why you guys limited, right, testnet to the founder node, 100%. Right, to 1776, right, as the number of nodes.
Yeah, I mean, again, demand side comes into play because we didn't want to just go out and sell 50,000 devices and then push it out. And our demand right now is massive. Like the grassroots thing really took a hold. It took a little while, but man, it started to roll, and we have a lot of people super interested. But we wanted to limit it because we want the network to be rewarded. We only have a limited amount of our supply on our end that we can run on this network to reward those people that are hosting on that device. If we were to sell 50,000 devices and they go out there and we have that same demand, well, people are going to plug them in and see, there's not much here, and then they're going to unplug it. What does that do to our network? Well, now our network's gone because they don't care about it. They wipe the operating system. They now use it for a home computer. They just leave it unplugged. They don't care because they're not earning there. So we had to create that demand side to make sure that people actually keep it plugged in and say, I am earning rewards. So that's a huge reason why we have that there, and why we only want to grow as our network, as the demand side grows. So as we continue to add new workloads, then we'll be able to open up new sales to devices and push that out. So
I love it. I, again, being totally focused on demand, love the matching of supply and demand, so that the nodes you're bringing on are getting usage. And I think that's where a lot of problems go wrong, honestly, is that they focus way too much on the supply side. The demand doesn't pick up quickly enough and people become disinterested, and like you said, they could repurpose the hardware for something else or unplug the device. So so looking forward, how are you guys going to go about balancing that supply and demand? Because you could have a couple of huge customers come on that you're going to drive up demand a bunch on the network. How are you making sure that you're growing the network on the supply side to match that demand as well?
Yeah, we always want to leave. So 60% kind of internally is what we're looking at of, demand and on the network side. So once we hit that 60%, or we get close to it, we can kind of show we need more devices in the network. And the reason we're at that 60% is, it still gives us a decent amount of room to, supply those big customers that come on. Like if, they were to come in and take 20% of the actual network, well, we can do that still. We can still add them to the network and then also sell new devices to grow with that. And so that's really where we want to make sure that we have enough there. Also failover internally, like if people unplug devices or power goes out, we have that ability to still, transfer those workloads over to the other devices within the network. So that's kind of our balance. We want to stay in a sweet spot. 50% is kind of that sweet spot. If we start falling below that in terms of, down in the 40%, well, it gives us opportunity to offer some great deals for workloads to come on board because we have this space. So come on board and be here. And our device owners understand, if it is a good deal right now, they're going to benefit in the future because, hey, we got new workloads in 6 months. Those are going to start paying off, that kind of situation. So
Sure. Okay, that makes sense. That was a question I had. And then looking at it, the third batch, everything's sold out, man. The Founders DeEEP devices are sold out right now. You can join a wait list. Okay, so for anyone that's wanting to participate, go ahead. Do you know when do you have an idea of when you might open up pre-orders again at this point?
So we have a few other partners that we're waiting to announce. There's other things that we're trying to work out on internally that would probably add a significant workload. We're actually planning to start announcing workloads that are currently out. We have about 100 of those that we want to add to the network over the next 6 months. So you'll start to see the moment we start to add these on, it's a flux node that starts to be able to run on the DeEEP network, that just increases the demand. And once we see that push to the point where we need to, we will. I would imagine we'll see something open up here in the next couple months, if not sooner.
Okay. And then your supply chain side of things, who knows? I don't know where you guys are getting your supply chain through, but tariffs aside, do you all feel like pretty confident you can keep up with the demand side on hardware?
Yeah, so we have some pre-orders already in. So we've put some pre-orders in, as we saw the tariffs coming into play. So we have a supply that's, currently being sent our way. So we have some available. We have pathways that will actually make it so the minis forums won't be the only device that's out there. There's a possibility. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but there's a possibility it could be a bring your own device scenario as well. Security is a huge issue there. Like when you start to talk about the bring your own device. So there's going to be a lot of requirements there. It may be that we have other deals with other companies that offer hardware that's similar or better than the minis forum device as well that we're going to offer. So we definitely see that as a path. And we have a few things that we're going to start to, push out to people to show that, it's not just the minis forums that there. We love it. It's a great piece. Like I also have one right here so you guys can see it too. So, how small it is, and just everything that's compact and powerful. We love this. Like it's a great device for it. And we want to continue going down that route, but obviously tariffs, obviously shipping concerns. There's a lot of things that come into play with that. We have a lot of other things in our ability to expand into. So
okay, so you guys are ahead of the curve. I expected as much.
Again, you got to think. Talking about Ben and Chris. They've been down this road. Like they've developing and shipping from China and different countries for 15 years, 12 years. I can't remember how long they've been doing it, but they've been down that route. So they saw it coming 8-10 months ago. They're like, we need to have this in place, in this plan. So Ben's been working his butt off. He has a lot of different options.
See, that is the importance of the team. I'm telling y'all. That's why I put so much emphasis on the team and their work history, their ability to execute in the past, so you know that they can execute in the future. I want to talk about the reward system, the flywheel effect a little bit. You touched on it earlier. You obviously, for hosting a device, you will earn, the DeEEP token, the utility token, but you also get a percentage of the revenue that comes from the different workloads. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
So we'll start with minting rewards because that's essentially everybody has a device right now that they're earning just the minting rewards. Hosting will come as we go to mainnet and with our L1 that's out there, and the hosting rewards are on there, so people can see exactly what's hosted on there in that site. But the minting rewards, you have a plugin reward, which essentially is what it says. You plug it in and you earn. As long as you have plugged into bandwidth and power, you're going to be earning. As we move down this path, those plugin rewards may require a certain amount of bandwidth, and we'll be able to test that, or a certain amount, a certain type of uptime that's on there as well.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, you plug it in, you earn those minting rewards, and what that does. Well, let me talk the other minting rewards is utilization rewards, because those will come into play as well as we start to deploy workloads, and those go into a pool and are shared with everybody that is on the utilization rewards. And what that does is it seeds the ecosystem. NerdNode itself receives 0 DeEEP. So, and we made it this way on purpose, because in order to have that flywheel effect, somebody has to be able to go in and purchase in that demand for DeEEP. Well, NerdNode is that demand right now, and NerdNode has to buy DeEEP off of the open market. Whether it's OTC, whether it's on a DEX. And yes, there probably will be a SEX down the road, centralized exchange. That's not our focus. Our focus is to launch a token that we can see the community utilize and where it goes from there. So we had to have that seeded, and that's where the minting rewards come into play. So that'll be deployed out. It'll have some time to kind of marinate in the ecosystem. Then NerdNode will have to purchase that to be able to run those workloads. So you have to have both of those in play. And then you start talking about the hosting rewards, which is the second side of the passive income.
Yeah.
And as we launch that L1, everybody will see the workloads that are being ran on their device itself, and what that, and as we mature, our idea is we want the device owners to be able to, if they want, they could just choose easy mode, which most people will plug it in and go. We want the ability for those people that own those devices to say, I only want a certain type of workload, or I am open to, other types and, different SLAs that can go into play. And then we share in that, in the actual revenue that can come into place, and right now it's 50-50 essentially. So 50% goes to the device owners, and then the other 50% essentially is coming into between the DeEEP network and NerdNode in terms of fees.
So. Okay. And there's an example you have here. It's like hypothetical, just so everyone watching knows.
Yeah.
So some examples of some of the workloads on the left, what that would generate. And then obviously you would get in this case, 50% of the revenue coming from that. Again, hypothetical. All right. So
hypothetical. Yeah. And ETH validators, that's a big one, right? Like they, to run an ETH validator, people are paying anywhere just for the actual virtual server, $150 to $250 a month for a virtual server, where they're doing all the work, right? And so this is something that we're going to be putting onto the DeEEP devices. That is a huge revenue share in terms of what we can offer the DeEEP device, and 50% of that revenue alone on a monthly basis. So there's a lot of great opportunities just in the Web3 space. So.
Yeah, and obviously, as you bring on more workloads, there'd be more options and more opportunity there. So it's only going to grow from there. And I love the fact that the native token, has real utility tied to it, that's tied to the success of the project. As you mentioned, maybe bandwidth, uptime. Obviously, that makes sense. The more value you bring to the network, the more tokens you should earn. In theory, right? It should be tied to that. So you're in testnet right now.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned mainnet. So are you guys launching on your own L1 then? Is that how that's going?
Avalanche L1. So
okay, Avalanche. Okay.
Yep, Avalanche L1. They just provide it's a great platform in that sense, fees wise, growth wise. The support that they provide. So Avalanche really for us just creates a massive opportunity. And when you start talking about income wise, like there is Avalanche 9000 is just kind of a platform where people that are launching their own L1s are pushing their stuff out there, and they're gonna get some grants from the Avalanche, from the Ava Labs Foundation. There's 200 or 300 companies alone that the majority of them are going to be running their own they're all running their own L1. They all have to run some sort of validator, whether that's internal or whether it's external, like a Beam validator, which is on an L1 for Avalanche. Those are heavy workloads that we plan on pushing to the network itself, and they're brand new coming out there. We see a massive opportunity and growth there. Being an L1 to run all L1s type of situation, or at least have that ability for people to use our network. So.
Sure. And in the research I've done over the years in Avalanche, it seems to be it's going to be the go-to ecosystem for gaming. From everything that I can tell, it seems like they're going to be the clear winner there, and there's going to be overlap for you guys there too, I would think.
100%. Yeah.
So let's talk about, for someone that is getting one of these nodes, right? What does that setup look like? How difficult is it? Do they have to be technologically savvy? Is it pretty easy? So you explain that process.
Yeah, again, like we did with Nerd Node, we wanted to make it as easy as possible for people to run this stuff. They just, come in, they select what node they want to run, and they give us a credit card, and it's off to the races. We do the rest. Well, there's a power port and an Ethernet port, and so you plug that power in, and you plug your Ethernet in, and then you walk away. Literally, that's easy. That's it.
So your grandma can do it.
Your grandma can do
it. So is there a restriction to how many you can have in one location and one IP? Or do you need to spread them out in different geographical locations? What does that look like?
That's a great question. In our docs, we push out that we want an IP per device, and we realize there's a lot of people that want to buy multiple devices and run them on a single IP. And while you can do that, you can buy those and run them on a single IP. There are protocols that we run through Nerd Node that require a single IP per node that's ran there. And so when we come to those type of workloads, that could be where the bottleneck comes into play, right? We're working on some internal protocols with clustering that will help alleviate that and essentially give you the ability. So if you bought 3 devices, or 5 devices, your cluster essentially just becomes a larger DeEEP device in that sense. So that's something that we're working on. We don't have that available yet. We still push out, and everybody that's plugging in, they're getting their plugin rewards. Like they're still getting their plugin rewards regardless of IP. It's when the workloads start to come into play. That's the major factor that is going to really make a single IP be an effect.
For people that are interested, you got to join the wait list. It sounds like there are workloads coming online, so they're going to be reopening that pretty soon, so people can get devices. And then that does bring me to my next question, which is, what does that roadmap look for? You hinted at it. Sounds like you have a lot of big announcements coming as far as workloads usage on the network. What does that look like? Through the end of this year, and then as far as your guys' goals and your roadmap moving forward.
Yeah, so I think you'll see in the next few months some big ones that are coming out. Like I said, the DAC documentation of how we want to operate. We're going to kind of push that out to the community, let them read through it, comment on it, and talk to us about that. We're going to see the actual L1, the token will launch. We'll have a token launch event this year. People always want a date. I'm never going to give a date for that because then people are like, it was supposed to be this date, or, oh my God, it's going to come. Like there's technical issues, man. Like it's going to come. And it just gets kind of crazy. As you see that, we're also going to see, new workloads being announced. Right now the last couple of weeks, there's been a new workload announced each week. You'll probably start to see that ramp up over the coming few weeks as we approach the end of the year. You're going to start to see multiples being launched on a weekly basis in terms of there's thousands out there that we can offer. And that's our goal, by the end of the year is 100 new workloads. We'll probably end up being more than that, and realistically as we go down there, but you'll see that kind of being pushed out. partnerships. Like I said, we have games that are out there that are wanting to launch solely on our network itself. There's game developers that just want to use our network. My white whale that's out there is these NFT projects that are decentralized, and all of your data is sitting on an AWS server. And so when they don't pay the bill, you still have the contract, which is great, but where's your cool little JPEG that's tied to that? It's gone, right? So these NFT projects that are out there our network is a perfect network for that. And there's a lot of options that I've talked with a few of them, that can really involve the community. That's what NFT projects are, right? They're community driven. They love the art, or they just love like the fact that they could trade it, whatever it is. There's a really cult factor that's along with that. And they're going to help you push that into the network. They're going to help you maintain that network. Whether you launch a node that hosts all that software, like there's a lot of opportunity there. So yeah, anyways, I went on a little tangent for you.
You're good. I love it. The demand side is something that I'm always the most interested in, because again, when you look at some of these other projects, and I will emphasize this until I'm blue in the face, look at the demand side. Is the team able to execute? This team has proven already with NerdNode that they have demand. They've already built it up. They have basically, now they're creating this network that they're able to move demand over instantaneously. That's amazing to already have the demand there to grow off of. And from a sales point of view too, once you already have a track record, you already have usage on your network, that job gets so much easier as opposed to starting from, from scratch and trying to convince people to use your network.
That's what we saw in the node side before DePIN hardware nodes started to kind of push out. It's the same thing as run this node and then we'll push all this stuff to it. Well, what we saw is everybody's running a node and there was no actual real workload tied to it. The majority of them were ping nodes or whatever happened. Just the demand side is so big, and having that there is I'm glad you recognize that. So when we first started talking and you said that, I was like, yes, he gets it. I love it. So
yeah, I use that analogy for a lot of these DePIN projects. They use the Field of Dreams analogy. Like if you build it, they will come. It's like, well, will they come? Will the demand come?
Yeah,
you never know.
Will the ghosts come out of the field and actually play on your field? I don't know.
Exactly. But you guys have proven that they already have. So I love that. I love what you guys are doing. Love that you're matching supply and demand, and instead of you guys could sell tens of thousands right now, I'm sure, if you wanted to. The demand on this project, I've seen it pick up so much, but the fact that you're, holding back on that to make sure that you have usage on the network, I think is huge. I think it says a lot about you guys as a team. You also mentioned something earlier that I like as well. So the centralized exchange, I'm sure it'll come at some point. It's not something we're worried about. And this is something that we see with projects. They delay their TGE until they have several centralized exchange listings or until they have favorable market conditions. And it's like, do you really believe in the longevity of your project if you're that worried about the short term and the launch? It's always a question that comes up in my mind. So the fact that you're not, centralized exchange isn't necessarily like a focal point right now, I think that to me is a green flag.
Well, I'm with you 100%. And, they're definitely on the back burner. Like we want to be able to have some centralized exchanges down the road for, off ramping for people. But in reality, in our crypto universe right now, with cross-chain trading, easy bridging, and the liquidity that we have on decentralized exchanges, and it just keeps getting better and better. In all reality, there isn't a lot of use cases outside of just offboarding, like basically getting your money into a bank account. Mm-hmm. That's really all they're there for. So the trade factor and that kind of stuff, and to be able to, use these decentralized exchanges, it's so much better than 2 years ago, 3 years, 4 years ago. And so for us, it's like, you let the community, you guys, if you want to trade it, start a liquidity pool. Great. Go do that. If that's where it's at, have at it. And the demand will be there because, again, NerdNode has to buy it somewhere. So who's it going to be from?
For sure. I think with the stablecoin legislation that's coming, that layer of having to use a centralized exchange to get money to your bank account could change as well, which would obviously be huge. But obviously we covered a lot, but Closing thoughts here. I mean, is there anything you want to add that we haven't discussed yet?
Yeah, I think when we talk about demand, this is a big demand side. Is NerdNode's not the only node as a service provider, right? There's multiples that are out there. They do a really good job. We've actually talked to multiples of these about the DeEEP network and wanting to deploy them on there. In our roadmap internally, and as we launch the DAC, and you see what we're doing there, NerdNode, or at least the licensing of what NerdNode has built, is going to be deep. It's going to go too deep. So the actual it's not a conflict of interest for another node as a service provider to come onto the DeEEP network, right? DeEEP network is purely the network itself and can offer all the same things that it does for NerdNode to every other node as a service provider. And that's just the tip of the iceberg as you look at that, because there's so much throughput that they have. And then it's a snowball effect again from there. So that's a fun one to really kind of conceptualize as we move into that direction, to bring in so many other people and so many other node as a service providers, and then just the companies themselves, man, they all see it. It's going to be there. I could talk for hours. I could talk for hours on all the different things there, and I probably should slow down because everybody's like, don't tell everybody that yet. It's like, we'll tell them everything. Let's go.
Do tell. I mean, but that's mind blowing. Think about the possibilities there. For people that are wanting to learn more about your project, where's the best place for them to look? Obviously, your website. You mentioned Discord. Or anything else that you'd recommend?
Yeah, Discord's the best, honestly, in terms of, because we have a great community there. Like I said, grassroots, they love the project. A lot of them have dug deep into our tokenomics and have, really worked with us in terms of what that looks like, and they understand it. Come in there and talk, ask questions, whether it's Betty, who's our AI bot in there that's going to answer it, Rusty, who's awesome, he's quick on it, or it's community members a lot of time are going to jump in and chime in and help, give you the answers that you need. Reach out through Twitter, our YouTube channel. We've got a bunch of videos on there explaining a lot of different things that we're doing. But yeah, those are probably the main spots.
Okay, well, that's fantastic, everybody. Make sure to join that wait list. And Nate, this has been a lot of fun, man. And I would love to have you on again as the project progresses, as you guys continue to make moves. But thanks again, man, for coming on today.
Yeah, anytime, man. It was good. It was good talking to people that see the vision.
I'm doing my best, man. You've even made it more clear for me now. I'm like, oh, man, I got to order some more of these things. But I appreciate it, man. Thanks again. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.